and welcome back to another great episode of Secure to Halt Podcast. As always, I am your host, Denny Caballero, and today I have the pleasure of bringing you Edie Nathan, psychotherapist and grief counselor, author, healer, and an expert not just on grief, but trauma, loss, and the intricate dance that is coping with a life that's bittersweet. Because we have to, at some point, deal with grief. All of us. It's something that connects us all. And I am so grateful for you being here. Your book was absolutely amazing. The book that we're going to reference today is It's Grief, The Dance of Self-Discovery Through Trauma and Loss. Edie, thank you so much for being here today.
Denny, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I want to jump right into this and ask you to give us a little bit of a primer on who you are before we get into this dance.
Well, it's such a great question. Who are you? You know,
Yeah.
who are you? And I see myself as a storyteller that crafts the stories of life into stories that we all carry within us when faced with grief, which is unavoidable, when faced with trauma, that's going to be specific to people, and when faced with just the challenges of life. But we all have our stories, and so I guess who I am is a storyteller, and I love the hero's journey, and I love to think of the hero's journey, and the hero's journey that we leave what we know, and we struggle, and we fight the fight in either the cave, which is metaphorical, or within our own selves, our own bodies, and then we come out forever changed. And that means that what we know of the world prior to the shifts that have been made and the struggles that we've been the warrior with, that we then come out seeing the world with a different lens and seeing ourselves in that world with a different lens. And I'd say that's me.
Well said. And I want to pause and really just like when we first engaged, when we first talked, that was such a strong connection. We both talked about that hero's journey. And it's such a powerful, powerful thing to realize after a life of going abroad and being in war and being tested, that we think that's the journey. That's the true testament of what a warrior is. But the reality is there's been a war brewing inside that none of us take the time to stop and really address. Like, that's the true hero's journey, the deep internal work. That's the battle that we end up having to face at some point. And that's what really makes us that true warrior. And I had no idea. It wasn't until I was in my late 30s, 39 now. I think I started at 36, with really understanding that it's within you. You carry so much, and you're constantly fixated on some external combat, some foreign war. And that's not where it's at. It's inside. And that's where you have these lessons. I know more about myself now in the last few years than I ever did as a young man at war. And that's, man, I'm glad I know myself now. But man, if we can just impart this knowledge on so many other individuals, just think of all the heartache and all the amazing things we can help people recover from and heal from at an earlier age.
So true. So true. So well said. You know, there's the external warrior or the external war, and then there's the internal warrior and the internal war.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you, I look at your work, and the first thing that comes to mind is like, how did somebody get this insightful about grief? How did somebody go through this and really, truly, from my perspective, when I look at grief, or when I used to look at grief, it just seemed like this 5-step process that you just linearly followed. And if it doesn't go right, or if you didn't follow it, then it just filled with more guilt and more issues as to like, why can't I be normal? Why can't I do this? Like, but in your words and in the way you put everything, I'm like, okay, is she tapping into something outside of this realm? Like, how did she get into this?
Uh, hmm. It's about presence. It's about being present. It's about um, allowing our learning to come through in ways that we least expect it. And that can be from a relationship, and from our losses, and from certainly our teachers, and from beliefs, whether they're religious or otherwise spiritual. It's not for me to say how one gets their knowledge or their information. But I do think that this is that what I have taken in has been because of my own trauma and because of my own losses. And I lost my partner when I was 27 years old. And that loss actually opened up my memories to losses and traumas that I really didn't want to remember and that had been buried. And that one loss, that major, major loss, losing Paul, in and his loss of his fight against lung cancer, um, opened up realms of unknowing of a part of and parts of myself and my history that had been, put into a bundle, shut down. And I actually thought that I sent it down with a big block of cement into the deep sea and that it would never come back again. And I really believed that that's going to happen. You know what? I don't ever have to deal with this crap ever, ever, ever again. But, you can plan all you want, but it's going to come back on some level. And when you are the most open, perhaps, or the most vulnerable, and then all of a sudden, what I call the Swiss cheese memory, the memory of Swiss cheese, that those areas of the holes in the Swiss cheese are what I call the memory holders, and they're dark and they're black and they're crevices and they're vortexes, and they hold the sacred of that which you do not want to know. And so when an experience occurs, whether it's because you've come out of war and are dealing with PTSD, or what I also call PTT, post-trauma trauma, because it's a trauma that happens after a traumatic experience, but I'm not thinking of it as a disorder. I'm thinking of it as that the brain is in protective mode. And so it's a post-trauma trauma, not necessarily a disorder. Yeah, and there's lots to be said that, a disorder helps us to diagnose, but when we live with it and we think of ourselves as disordered, sometimes that can create something. Like, I didn't want to think of myself as having been traumatized. I didn't want to think that my family situation, or having been teased or having been sexually abused, was something that I couldn't handle, and so that I could put it into the bundle and I could attach it to concrete and it could sink. But the thing about concrete, when you have another bigger issue, is that somehow the concrete just disintegrates and everything starts to rise. And so that's what happened. And it was really, I carry Paul's death with me in my work, because it's so important to understand that I can pay his life forward just like we can pay our traumas forward, so that we can learn about ourselves and we can accurately define what's going on.
Yes, absolutely. That reminds me of Viktor Frankl's quote, and I know I'm going to butcher it because my memory's the worst, but suffering for the sake of suffering, like it brings nothing into this world, does nothing for us or other people. Turn that suffering into something positive, into something that can help and reach out and do so much more healing and good. And every provider that I have ever had was a victim of trauma, had issues with grief, had lost somebody close to them. People that get into this career field of wanting to help others, they're also trying to do good because of what they've experienced. And that's an amazing gift. That is truly something that it clicks finally when you find yourself in the ability to heal and start the healing dance. You get to the point in your life where you realize, I can do something good with this. But for my demographic, our guys, we never get there while we're still in the system, while we're still there. We carry their names, we carry the lost ones on our wrist, on tattoos, and we never face it. We never sit down and really, truly face it. And then every anniversary, we go out there to the rock gardens, we stay, but we're not present. We're not looking at them as that memorial, as a tribute, a good reminder of the good. We're looking at a loss, constantly engaged in step one. And then we drink, get involved with drugs, get involved in all sorts of horrible maladaptive coping mechanisms. And it's like, when do we stop? When do we actually say, you know what? I never dealt with 2012, 2013, 2015, whatever year you experienced your loss, because we're always so either scared to admit that we don't know what to do, or we're just scared to engage with those memories because we don't want to relive trauma. And we feel like they're so intimately connected. We don't want to sit and be still with emotions. Mindfulness taught me that you have this superpower, right? That you can sit still and observe and hold things in a non-judgmental way and start doing that work. But it's so hard to give that as a tool to somebody. I think your framework in your book is beautiful in that it doesn't just give you 4 or 5 steps. It gives you real concrete steps and a toolkit.
The toolkit.
Yeah.
The toolkit and for anyone who's listening, I know that you probably hear clinicians talk about, oh, there's a toolkit, and if you follow this, you're going to get, you're going to feel better, and everything's going to, you're going to find that there's a shift, and you're not going to hear me say that. What I think is important is that we are all individuals. And part of the, the book that Denny is talking about is called It's Grief, the Dance of Self-Discovery Through Trauma and Loss. And the reason that I talk about the dance is because it's a partnership. It's not because I'm lightly saying, okay, so, let's dance here. Let's have a dance party. But in a way, it's a partnership party. And when you are, and I know that we use the word survivor. I'm not a big survivor. I don't love the word because I think that we use it over and over again. And when we use a word over and over again, sometimes it loses its meaning. So I like to expand that word to survivalist. And there's this show on TV, and maybe some of you have seen it, called Naked and Afraid. And these people are like put out into the wilds, and they're naked, and they have to like fend for themselves. And, what's hilarious is that there are cameras there filming all of this. So you must remember that they are probably not so alone. But with that said, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe they have their own cameras that they set up, but my sense is that there's probably some camera folks around
Right.
filming this. But actually, let me go back to the premise that what trauma feels like is naked and afraid. And the last thing anybody wants to feel when they are a survivalist is naked and afraid. They want to be in touch with their warrior and the strength of the warrior and the pride of the warrior. And so the tools, to go back to the tools and to go back to kind of the book, is that I don't say to you, if you do this tool, and this tool, you will feel better. I give you a bunch of different things. Try them. Maybe one part of a tool will work and another part won't. Use what you can and make it your own. Because when we can make these tools your own, when you can make them your own, then a wonderful thing happens. You have ownership over your healing journey, and you partner with it. And what happens when you might show up, and be among a group of folks who are honoring their losses and their lost friends and their lost comrades and their lost warriors. How present are you? How present can you afford to be? Because you know that you need to go on with your day. But the thing is, like with anxiety, when you avoid it and you ignore it, you know what happens? It gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then you don't just have a 500-pound gorilla in the room. You've got a 15,000-pound gorilla in the room. And it's kind of like the concrete that I was just talking about. So the idea here is, instead of like paying the gorilla to become 15,000 pounds, you're saying, no, you know what? I'm going to step into this rather than run. And so that instead of being naked and afraid, what you're saying is, I'm going to step into the fear. I'm going to step into my nakedness, which is really vulnerability. And I'm going to find the proper words or expressions that best express what's going on for me in my body, in my heart, in my feet, in my head, in my throat.
Yeah. Leaning into discomfort. I tell this to people all the time. Life's not about constantly seeking pleasure and comfort. Like, I get it. You work. I get it. You are doing so much for your country, for your nation. You're doing real important stuff, and you want to come home and wrap yourself up in a blanket, lay on your couch and watch Netflix. But running away and constantly seeking comfort isn't going to make the problem go away. You have to lean into discomfort. You have to be able to lean out and touch into that fear. Nobody likes doing the work. I've never been able, even when I was going through some of the worst parts of it, it's ugly. It's uncomfortable.
It's ugly. And who wants to be ugly, right, Denny?
Yeah.
Who wants to be ugly? Nobody wants to be ugly. And, I do an exercise in the morning, and I'm not going to do it for you, Denny, but I do ugly, what I call ugly face. Okay. And ugly face is like, I open my mouth and I do cringe my eyes. And as funny as that sounds, ugly face actually, it just opens you up. It opens you up. And, for anyone who's listening, there are a lot of ways that we are wounded, and you can have multiple wounds. You can have the emotional wounds, but you can also have the physical wounds and the phantom pain of those physical wounds. And the emotions can also feel like phantom pain, and it's a trick. And your mind loves to trick you. Your mind loves to say you can't do this. You can't tell anybody because you'll be ashamed. You can't share your desperation because then you're not brave. And so it is about not listening to the phantom pain. There's something for people who have lost limbs with the phantom pain where they actually put a mirror up to the limb that's lost to the point where your actual limb may begin. And it is teaching the brain that it's no longer there to help with the phantom pain. So in a similar exercise, it's like looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, I see you and I know you're in pain and you don't have to do this alone.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I never thought to think of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think one of the things that you touched on was being able to take tools, make them your own, but also healing at your own pace.
Yes. Yes.
I was constantly, you grow up in this brotherhood of, you can't admit that you have a weakness, or if somebody thinks they're being compassionate by saying, hey, stop being a bitch, suck it up. We all lose people. Keep that shit under wrap. So you swallow it down, you push it down, and it's like, wow, like, then you finally start getting healthy, start and realize that, okay, this is a journey. What external pressures do I have to silence? Because so many voices and so many critics and so many outside sources want you to just heal, get over it. So you lose a friend.
And I talk about that in the book. I talk about, the critic and the judge, and the critic and the judge, those are phantom voices. Okay. That's an example of, phantom pain. They love to take over. They love to say, let me just take over, man. Let me harness all of your energy and make you feel like shit. And, and the thing is that it's about becoming a cognitive interrupter, and cognitive is your brain and it is your voice, and changing the messaging and saying to the judge, you know what, there's no room here. Get out, get out now. And you replace it with a kindness. Now, that kindness is really hard to achieve. It's really, really hard.
Yeah.
And having cognitive interrupters, and I have actually a list of positive cognitions in the book, and I have a list of negative cognitions too, so that you find the negative cognition and then you do a correction. You do a correction with a positive cognition, and you play around with, with being the interrupter and constantly being the interrupter. The other part is who you are. Like, are you an introvert? Are you an extrovert? Are you an ambivert, which is like some place in the middle? Are you over distanced with your emotions, meaning that you are kind of apart, aside, that you don't let anybody know really what's going on, and you kind of have you look like you're just solid, and then there's under distanced where you're just, crying, and perhaps within you, within the interior part of you, your heart is constantly beating, and you're agitated all the time, and you're reactive, and that's an underdistanced emotional perspective. And then what we want is calibration. You're going to have a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but you're really trying to find the balance of your emotions. Being able to identify, okay, you know what? I'm actually an introvert, and I'm actually lately been very overdistanced. I need to be able to move more to center. And what that does is it gives you very specific ideas about what your movement toward greater balance, emotional balance, and partnering with that can look like.
Absolutely. I think also the other thing that I was not aware of, but as I look back and look at how I've recently dealt with my grief, I feel a cognitive change. Like there's a difference when you're deeply in grief, and reading about neuroplasticity and the brain's ability to change and morph and grow while you're going through this, that blew my mind. Um, I know
Your
depression
brain is one
intimately.
of your greatest allies,
Yeah. Yes.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Like, how does that to me is just such a insane concept that we've been told all our lives that, like, hey, there's no, you can't fix anything in your brain. It's once you damage it. And now we're learning about all the things we can do to make and improve our clarity, our thinking, and actually heal our brain. Um, and neuroplasticity is just one of those things that's like really fascinating. Like,
It is. It's really fascinating, and I say grief is your greatest teacher, and your brain is one of your greatest allies if you
no,
use it, and it can really help you with metamorphosis and just thinking. I can change my brain, and I don't have to hold this, whatever this is, in the same way
no,
that I have been.
allowing
But there
yourself to
is
be
one
free of that.
requirement: you got to be willing to to face off, to partner with it, to say,
Yeah.
okay, I'm gonna see you. I'm going to see, who you are. I'm gonna ask you questions when you come in and you want to take me down.
And that's something that I realize that so many people have a problem with, the voice, that critic. It's overbearing, and perhaps that cheerleader is, if it's non-existent, it's very small. I dealt with that all my life. The internal critic was huge. There was barely any positive engagement from any sort of internal positive voice. And people, when I bring up the concept of being able to start with positive affirmations, that seems like the worst and most horrible thing anybody can think of. That doesn't work. I'm like, why aren't you willing to try? Just try to engage with your inner voice and be positive. Self-compassion is so vital to developing a solid sense of who you are. And nobody ever told that to me. Nobody ever expressed how important it was. And now when I share it, I see the same negative reaction that I once had on this person's face of like, I don't need that. Self-compassion, that's not a real thing. Just discipline and self-esteem. But now I can see that self-compassion is also a key element when going through grief. Being able to tell yourself, hey, at your own speed, at your own time, like, you can do this. You don't have to meet the standard of some outside organization or
Yeah, there's no
person.
right way, right? There's
Yeah.
no right way. And if somebody tells you that there's an order to the way you need to do this, well, I'd like to hear about that, because I've never seen grief look the same in anyone. You know how we all have fingerprints, Denny, and that's one of our identifiers. It's probably it's and our eyes and the shape of our eyes, they're, biometrics, right? I mean, you look at
Yeah.
the eye. So, grief is kind of like that. You're going to experience it in your way, and it is your way, and no one has experienced it the way you experienced it. And trauma, it's the same thing. No one experiences trauma in exactly the same way, and this is what's so important to understand.
Yeah.
You and I also talked about in our pre-conversation, which I wish we had recorded, because it was so wonderful, and as is this one. But we also talked about, what happens when any of your listening audience has come back from being away and, returned to family, and they're forever changed. And I have created a term called sexual grief. And that term is something that I believe happens to many folks. Warriors, yes. People coming back from situations where they've been away from their partners, their kids. But also it happens in ways that we might not imagine. Like, you know,
Mhm.
a kid who has like a first really bad sexual experience, and that affects their ability to get close to another. And so when
Yeah.
you come back and you've seen what you've seen, and you're dealing with the trauma, and you're dealing with the grief, the idea of being able to give yourself to your loved one, or to be warm and loving, or to be intimate, or to actually feel like you are worth loving, to actually feel, because I call it sexual grief, but understand it's not about sex as much as it is about a response. It's a natural response to an unnatural sexually traumatic event or experience. And when we have been involved in war, or you've been stationed somewhere where there's been um, no outlet for warmth or care, when and we know we've heard about the many stories of abuses, sexual and emotional, that happen to our warriors, to our men and women who are in our armed forces, and that sexual grief is present. Again, it's
Absolutely.
my term. So understand that what ends up happening is like a self-loathing. If you've experienced any of those abuses and you come home, or it happens on base, and you're filled with shame and you're not sharing it with anyone, and then you've got another internal war going on. And, more and more, the realization is that this needs to be spoken of. And if we don't speak of it, then we are in denial. And that denial just ends up making things get bigger and bigger and worse and worse. And what ends up happening with this sexual grief response is it's a hostage taker. It holds you hostage. It stops you from actually being able to live a life that's worth living.
Hmm.
And I speak of this because, though this book isn't out yet and I'm in the process of writing it, that loathing is akin to the shame and the judge and the critic, all bundled into one piece of loathing or disgust. And when someone is feeling that loathing or that disgust or that regret and guilt and shame, it's very hard to then think of oneself as being able to love the self, one, and also love another. And so then that all gets combined with the the trauma and the grief that isn't the sexual grief, but is the grief for the losses of your partners and of your friends, and sometimes even of the role that you played when you were in active duty, and then no longer having that role. But let me just go back for a moment, if you don't mind, Denny, and just say that
Absolutely. Of
to
course. Yes.
okay, to be to be held hostage, that what I teach is learning how to be a hostage negotiator. And it's the
Mm.
hostage negotiator within your mind. And the hostage taker is sexual grief, and learning how to be curious. And that is like being vulnerable and saying, okay, I've got to listen to you. I've got to listen to what's going on. I've got to admit that I was hurt, that I was abused, that something happened that should not have happened. And I need to at least start to write about it for myself, and talk about it to safe people, and to be curious about it. And that curiosity is your first strategy to being that hostage negotiator. And the second is having empathy. That's knocking down the critic. That's knocking down the judge. That's taking the hostage taker and saying, okay, so you're here for protection, and I'm mourning something that I've lost that is really so important to me, because what we know is that the sexual self is a primal self, and it enables us to feel good about ourselves, to look in the mirror and say, hey, I feel powerful and strong and empowered. And that when that leaves because of how someone treated us or hurt us, that then affects our ability to have any kind of empathy. And so that empathy is a strategy that's also part of forgiveness.
Yeah.
And then it's developing our rapport. That's the dance. And there's like three more strategies, but those are the three at the top.
I think this speaks to so many family members, the wives, the significant others, and the individual, of course. But reconciliation, coming back from deployment, coming back from trauma, we tend to focus on just the individual operator, the individual person that was deployed in combat. We have so few resources, and we never fully focus on the spouse, the partner.
Yes, and certainly the spouse and the partner get affected by sexual grief as well,
Yes.
as their returning loved one from deployment, and how to re-engage. And you may have only been thinking, I can't wait, and then neither one of you know how to operate. And there's a sexual, I mean, maybe things are totally functioning well, but it's like there's such an awkwardness, and there's been so much time, and both of you have changed.
Mm-hmm.
And there is that sexual grief. There is, and if there's been any kind of emotional or physical or sexual abuse that's happened to your deployed loved one, and they come back and they're not able to speak of it because it is unspeakable, then there is something that is being experienced and felt, that by the partner, by the wife, even by the children, that
Mm-hmm.
has no expression. And that what the idea of sexual grief does is it gives an accurate testament to something that is a natural response to what's been going on.
No, I'm just, and I know this is your concept, and
Yes.
you're still writing a book. It's still, it
Mm-hmm.
just seems so crazy that for our organization, because military still deals with so much sexual trauma. We have it's such a,
That's right.
I know that every organization deals with their own unique problems, but I feel while we're still making advances and still trying to address the issue and really stop it, we're still dealing with a lot, and we're not doing enough to speak or provide resources. And I really feel like our leaders need to do more to bring concepts like this and make it available, because
Yes, and
it's
I'm
not.
actually working on that right now, Denny. I'm trying to, figure out a way to get to to the social workers, to the people who are working with everyone, the families, and the men and women that are deployed, and the men and the women that are coming back from deployment, because that once they hit the ground, and they're home, they may be home, their bodies might be home, but they're not home.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so to have this conversation and to really break it down into very usable pieces, it's what I talk about. And I actually have a 5-hour, like one day seminar that I'm giving, and then I'm doing like an intensive for just 20 people. So I'm doing, and I can certainly send you the link and you can pass it out. But I think
Would
the
love to.
5 hours is like $49. I mean, we're not talking about a lot of money, but I hope it's not a lot of money. And if anybody who's listening is interested and you are having financial difficulties, just reach out and, we will get you in, because it's a conversation that I think is really, really important. And if I get enough people from your podcast who are interested in this, I will do something just for you. We will find a date and we will just process and talk about grief and sexual grief, because sexual grief, again, is my concept. It is something that I am talking about and doing, like hitting the road with it, because it's a yes and to the experts and the thought leaders in trauma. It in no way takes away from all of the work that they're doing with psychedelics, with psilocybin, with ketamine to help heal and work with PTSD. It is a yes and. So it is not an instead of in any way. It's an add-on.
It's absolutely one of the things that we tend to think with any wonderful treatment modality, such as psilocybin, ketamine treatment, MDMA. We tend to think it's a magic wand, and oh man, I went through this experience and I'm healed. Hey, it opens a door for healing.
Thank
it opens
you.
a door for understanding,
Yes.
and having
So
a
well
powerful
said.
experience.
That's it. Yes.
Yeah. But there's still a road to healing you have to be on and dedicated to. And you have to be able to read and grasp these concepts and take them in. It might not be for me. It might not be, but maybe it's for my partner. So why shouldn't I be invested in this? In life, when you do find yourself with somebody, whatever they're going through, whatever you're going through together, be willing to be a student. Be willing to always be open to engage in new thoughts and new advances. Like, life's short. I don't want to cut myself off from learning or cap it off at like 40, 42, 43. No,
right.
The new concepts are coming out. To the audience out there, you have the ability to cultivate your attention and awareness and expand it. I know what it was like at first for me to get that back. There's a reason why I'm constantly reading. There's a reason why I'm constantly trying to bring on amazing new thought-provoking leaders such as Dr. Edie Nathan today. There's a reason I do that, because you owe it to yourself, to your loved ones, to your kids, your wife, to be learning and engaging with these things. Yeah, Netflix and comfort is great, but lean into discomfort. Challenge yourself to learn and think about new thoughts, new theories, because you never know what you're going to stumble upon and say, holy cow, I've been waiting for this my entire life. I waited. I needed the book, The Body Keeps a Score, when I was a child. I needed that book, and I found it at 36, 37. Wow. Eye-opening.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just like your book, just like so many other books. Brene Brown, Kristen Neff, all these people, I would have never picked them up as I was preparing for a combat deployment. I would have never picked them up in a million years. But here I am now, 39, advocating and saying, yeah, it's time for you to pick up a book again, one page at a time.
One
Pick
page
up a
at a
TED
time.
Talk.
That's right.
There's so much out there that can help us. And if it's not for us, it's to help somebody else. Like, we don't get through this. We don't get through this life by ourselves. We get through this together. We get through it together, whether it's a small group of peers, your community, your own little network. We have to be willing to sit down and have these conversations, expand the ability, challenge yourself to grow, to learn, to be more open to new concepts. The world is a beautiful, wonderful world filled with amazing people that have a lot of amazing, wonderful knowledge. And we're not going to get it by sitting down and watching friggin' Stranger Things for the 15th time.
Well, I'm a big believer that what soothes you is a great go-to. And if you find that you are disappearing into what soothes you, whether it's watching TV or drugging or too much drinking or, even, you know, multiple sexual partners that feel like you're just needing to feel something and it's like chasing cocaine, you never get that first high, but you're always chasing it. And it's
Yeah,
like chasing a way to feel when you're not able to. And instead of chasing it, sometimes it's about sitting with it and being curious about it and dealing with the hostage taker, which is your mind. And what I'm calling sexual grief is the hostage taker in some of the arenas that I mentioned earlier.
yeah. So when can we expect this book to come out?
Well, I'm in the process of looking for a publisher, and it's probably going to be a little bit of a minute, but I'm talking about it. And right now,
Yeah,
my working title is "Healing Sexual Grief: Reclaim the Self from Loathing to Liberation to Love," because it
I
all
love it.
comes down to love.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I used to hear sentiments like that and say, "Oh, okay, sure," but it's true. Um, it does come back to love, loving yourself, loving each other. Um,
Ultimately, yeah. But if
it's
you
not
know
a
what, but if
concept.
if you're loathing, right, Denny? If you're
Yeah,
loathing, you can't get to love. You first got to figure out, how am I going to liberate myself from this? And it is that sense of liberation. It is that sense of, how do I get to some sense of freeing myself, extricating myself from really being held hostage by
yeah.
these things.
No, that's a funny thing that you said. Freeing yourself from loathing. So many people find comfort. We find comfort in loathing, in getting stuck in it. Um, I have a friend right now that's deeply, deeply embedded in that cycle of wanting to get better, doing a few steps, and then just going right back, almost like willingly going back to quicksand. And it's like,
Hmm.
how can I get you to just take another step away, and then another, and then another, and then another, rather than one foot out and then jumping right back into it? There is a sense of comfort in staying in depression and loathing that it's just so hard to break.
Yeah, it is. It is hard to break. And when there's a success, and it can be, you can sit in the success, that is where the brain has a chance to change, you know. But it is being able to revel, uh, to say, oh, this, like, I felt better. And sometimes feeling better is far scarier than feeling really crappy. Because when you feel crappy, when you feel alone, when you feel desperate, and your mind is in that phantom pain cycle, and it's very real, and it convinces you things are bad, you're bad, you really shouldn't even be alive. And you can hear the temperament of that. One, there is no shame in getting help. There is no shame in saying, I can't do this alone. But somehow it's embedded in the system, in the systems of certain hierarchies, like the military, like like our cops and our fire people, that it's you don't get help because you'll be demeaned or you'll be demoted.
Yeah.
Get
And
help.
yeah, absolutely. Before I let you go, I was wondering, because sexual grief is something that a lot of people may not understand yet. what are some things that can help guide someone to start asking those questions? What are some thoughts or
Sure.
some words?
The first piece is understanding that this is a natural response to an unnatural sexually traumatic event or experience. So it's unnatural to be away from one's partner for 2 years. Yeah. Okay? And that can create sexual grief. Sexual grief is a yearning. Okay? So it is for you to look at, where have I been hurt, or how have I been distant from my partner? Am I having trouble wanting to get close or feeling good enough about myself to imagine a life outside of being deployed, outside of the military, and actually beginning to ask yourself the questions of the self. And that there's this metaphor that I use of like breaking through the concrete. And if you were to imagine that you are, like, you just have concrete around you and it's protecting you, what is it protecting? What is your sexual grief protecting, and how does it hold you hostage? Meaning, the hostage, usually when someone is held hostage, the hostage taker wants something. They want something. They want they they want more money, or they want an operation. In the movies, they want an operation for their partner, or they want to be seen, or they want to be noticed. There's something that is very public around what they're going through. And so I ask you to think about what in you needs to kind of go public for yourself. What do you need to hear? What are you yearning for? What are you hungry for? Is it getting close to another? And does that feel impossible? And then be curious about that. Let me be curious about that which feels impossible, like getting close to my partner, or getting close to my kids, or even getting close to myself.
Yeah.
Those are very small first steps. But those first steps allow for then the empathy or the forgiveness. And I see empathy and forgiveness as really working in tandem.
Yeah. And those are the little threads that you can start pulling out, the little pause, reflect, and really move away from ambivalence, move away from ignoring it, and just be still, be present, ask yourself those few questions, really start.
And being still may not be your jam. You could you could go into this on a walk, right?
Yes.
You could go into this while you're you're boxing in a gym. Okay. So stillness, I can't be still. When I'm still, forget it. Those, my negative thoughts come in. But when I'm walking, when I'm lifting weights, when I'm doing things that are active, that's when actually I can go into my conversations with the parts of me that I grapple with.
Yeah.
So I'm in no way saying not to be still, but stillness can mean different things for different people.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Always be still, be present. Doesn't always have to mean sit down, mindful walking, going out, some of your best thinking, some of the best thinking of the Stoics ever did. We're going on walks. Yes, but it does mean to not be engaged with Netflix, an audiobook, a podcast while you're doing it.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing is that I have this exercise in the book, and it's called Identify Your Warning Label. And we all have warning labels, and those warning labels our personal warning labels, like on mattresses, they have that warning label, like do not
Yeah.
throw out or you're going to be arrested. I mean, I don't know. Has anybody ever really been arrested if they've cut that tag off? I haven't met anybody yet, but who knows, So,
That was my
but
first arrest.
so that to be aware of what your warning labels are situationally. I know that when I go out in public and I know I'm going to be in a really crowded place, my warning label is don't get too close because I might growl.
Mm.
And that's my warning label. But then I also know that when I've had a long day, my warning label when I walk into the house is give me time and I'll warm up. And so those warning labels are also a really wonderful way to start the conversation around grief and around sexual grief.
I love that. Edie, thank you so much for being here today. I can't tell you how amazing this conversation was. It was the first time I had like notes that, I mean, we hit everything like from start to finish. And I like right here, my first thing was like the metaphor of why grief is just like a dance. And when you hit it off, when you brought that up, I'm like, dude, this is perfect because it is a dance. And it not in the way that it's perfectly choreographed.
No,
It's
a partnership, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a partnership. And sometimes you're doing the twist and sometimes you're doing the waltz and sometimes it's freestyle. And sometimes it's freestyle is gorgeous and sometimes it's really ugly.
Yeah, the judges give that dance 2 stars.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely.
Oh, Edie, thank you so much. What a pleasure.
Thank you, Denny.
When I cannot wait for your book to come out. Again, the book that we referenced is It's Grief, the Dance of Self-Discovery Through Trauma and Loss. Go out and get it. Look for it on our next issue of the debrief, and you can see it on our website as soon as I get the energy to update the website. Eddie,
and my website,
thank you.
If anybody is interested,
please.
Is edinathan at edinathan.com. edinathan.com. And if you let me know that you saw me or heard me on this podcast, I'll send you a free meditation.
Awesome. And your social media handles, where can we find you? On LinkedIn?
Oh, you can find me everywhere. Just Twitter, Instagram. I'm not on TikTok, but everywhere else, Facebook, and I don't know, LinkedIn. So you can find me and just, Edie Nathan. I think it's just Edie Nathan at Twitter. So whatever it's, and if you go to my website, edinathan.com, all of my handles are there and there are links to all of them. You can also see me on Psychology Today. I'm a blog writer for Psychology Today and on Medium and Substack. So.
Perfect. Yes. And we'll add all those links and places where you can find Edie on the podcast description. So just scroll all the way down and you'll see it there. So go do that now.
And don't forget, if you're interested in sexual grief, let me know. If I've got 20 people, we can create a workshop.
Awesome. Edie, thank you so much. Have an amazing day. Take care, everyone.
You too. Take care.